Welcome to our academic conference, Tradition and Liberation, Caritas and Veritate, Charity and Truth, and the New Face of Social Progress. Before saying more about the theme of our conference, we'll begin this morning with words of welcome on behalf of DePaul University. So the first person I'd like to present to you is Father Dennis Holtschneider, the 11th President of DePaul University and a priest in the Congregation of the Mission.
Oh, you're very kind. Good morning. Welcome to DePaul University. It's wonderful to have all of you here. And welcome to Chicago for many of you. We tried to get the sunshine out and the temperature's warm just for you. And it's nice to have you here. It's a great pleasure to welcome back to DePaul a frequent visitor and a welcome visitor, and His Eminence Francis Cardinal George. Welcome back. And also to welcome to DePaul University for the first time His Excellency Archbishop Celestino Migliore. Welcome, sir. We're honored that all of you, for the next few days, would join the university community in studying Pope Benedict's encyclical Caritas and veritate. DePaul University is named for St. Vincent de Paul, the father of charity. And his legacy and his faith shapes the many commitments of this university. The encyclical invokes multiple themes that resonate with our own hearts here in our Vincentian traditions, not the least of which is the organization of the Catholic Church and the wider world to serve the poor, inspired by a renewed zeal for the model of Christian charity found in the gospel. DePaul aims in many ways towards the ideal of being a living embodiment of that Vincentian and Catholic heritage. I'm pleased that as part of this conference that faculty from Department of Catholic Studies, from finance, from economics, from public service, as well as even representatives from our new Haiti initiative are here today and part of the conference program. St. Vincent frequently said to his priests and his brothers, love God, my brothers, but love God with the strength of your arms and the sweat of your brow. His faith was a practical charity. His charity was a practical one, but it was also filled with the eyes of faith for seeing Jesus Christ himself in the eyes of the most needy and most vulnerable of this earth. And so it was a thrill for us, actually, to read the Pontiff's encyclical and now to consider it deeply. We're quite privileged to have an array of distinguished pastors and scholars together in one place. And I'm truly pleased that DePaul can be of service to the church in this way. And I look forward to the many ways that we might additionally find ways for this university to be of service to the larger church, both locally and globally in the future. So I hope that you enjoy the rich offerings of the days ahead and that you truly feel welcome as part of the DePaul University community and family. We're really pleased and we're honored that all of you would come. And for those of you who skirted and braved the skies of Europe to come here, we hope you particularly enjoy the clear skies of Chicago. But may God bless you all, and welcome to DePaul.
Our second word of welcome is from Dean Charles Suchar, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Someone who's been at DePaul for many, many years and a great and unswerving supporter of the program in Catholic Studies and the initiative for the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you Chuck Suchar.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning. I am most pleased to be able to join Father Holtschneider in welcoming you to DePaul University and to mark the opening of this magnificent conference. And please allow me the personal extension of welcome to Cardinal George and Archbishop Migliore. As Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, I have been especially pleased to see a variety of efforts come to fruition in the recent years that have contributed palpably, significantly to the improvement of academic excellence and the further development of DePaul as a Catholic, Vincentian, and urban institution. And as far as our Catholic identity is concerned, one such very important effort is the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, the unit that has organized this very fine conference, which was founded in 2008 as part of the then growing program in Catholic Studies. And I'd like to take this opportunity to really congratulate both Catholic Studies, Karen Scott, but particularly Peter Casarella and his very important team of staff who have made this conference possible. Thank you very much for all your efforts, Peter. Today I'm particularly pleased to make an important public announcement regarding the recent developments in the center. With the formal recognition of the Department of Catholic Studies, they moved from being a program to a department this past January. The College of Liberal Arts and Sciences was able to announce the inclusion of Professor Michael Buddy, formerly professor and chair of the Department of Political Science, as a full-time member of the Catholic Studies, as a full professor in the Catholic Studies program, and senior research scholar in the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology. This quarter, we have also had the distinct privilege of welcoming Robert Wilkin, a very internationally recognized expert on early Christian history and professor emeritus from the University of Virginia, who has come to our center as a visiting research scholar. And on the occasion of the opening of this conference, I would also like to make official another very important step in this process of building up an absolutely unique research institute to serve DePaul and the Catholic community. Starting in the fall of 2010, the renowned systematic theologian William Cavanaugh, co-editor of the journal Modern Theology, and author of 5 critically acclaimed books that have been translated into Spanish and French, will be joining DePaul University, the Department of Catholic Studies, and the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology. And welcome, Bill Cavanaugh. Again, welcome one and all to DePaul University, and for your important support of the Catholic Church and the efforts at DePaul University. Your study these 2 days of the papal encyclical Charity and Truth will help all of us, I believe, to reflect more deeply upon the challenge of economic globalization. And as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, I'm particularly pleased to see that it is not only theology which will inform your various discussions and debates, but that you will reflect the diverse disciplines that make up the Catholic intellectual traditions, but also the various disciplines of liberal arts and sciences. Thank you very much for coming. I wish you a very magnificent experience here. Enjoy the conference, and welcome again.
Our next speaker, as Father Dennis noted, needs no introduction with the DePaul community, but since we have some guests from out of town, I'd like to make a brief formal presentation. His Eminence Francis Eugene Cardinal George, Oblate of Mary Immaculate, is the first native Chicagoan to serve as Archbishop of Chicago. He entered the missionary oblates of Mary Immaculate at a young age and went on to earn advanced degrees in philosophy and theology. In addition to being a pastor of this archdiocese, he's a former university professor and administrator and author of a very engaging and timely book entitled The Difference God Makes. He has served as the appointment of John Paul II as Bishop of Yakima, as Archbishop of Portland in Oregon, and on April 8, 1997, Pope John Paul II named him the 8th Archbishop of Chicago. He entered the Sacred College of Cardinals on January 18, 1998, and has served the Holy See and the Episcopal Conference of the United States in far too many capacities than I can enumerate on this occasion. And as many of you know, the Archbishop of Chicago is currently in his third year as President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. As has been noted, Cardinal George is a frequent and very welcome guest to DePaul, serving as an academic speaker, an expert on Latinos in education, as a homilist, and on more than one occasion as a teacher in a class for first-year students entitled Introduction to Catholicism. It is an extremely great pleasure to welcome Chicago's own Cardinal back to Chicago's University.
Thank you very much, Professor Casarella. And it's good to be with you this morning. I'm to give a few opening remarks, and I'd like to begin by pointing out what I think most have come to understand, that the key to Pope Benedict XVI's teaching is to explore how love is at the heart of every human activity. The basic reason for this is that in our Christian understanding of who God is, we say that God is love, which is a unique claim in many ways that has been constantly explored also throughout the 2,000 years since Jesus revealed the Father to us in the power of the Holy Spirit before ascending to the right hand of God. Because God is love and we are made in God's image and likeness, therefore, it makes some sense to say that love should be at the heart of every human activity. But then we come to economics. And the challenge to put love together with economics is great, and in ways that are sometimes persuasive and perhaps not persuasive to everyone. The Pope has done this in his third encyclical, his first social encyclical in the long series of social encyclicals that began at the end of the 19th century with Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum. Economics prides itself, at least in practice, of being a hard-headed way of looking at results in terms of a bottom line that has to be profitable if an enterprise doesn't go bankrupt. And the moral virtue that traditionally has governed economics is justice. Justice governs the exchange of commodities, the exchange of things, a quid pro quo kind of activity that can be certainly morally criticized, but always without reference to love, which comes either as motive to one's economic activity or to result in philanthropy and in charitable giving after the bottom line has been computed. By contrast, love governs personal relationships, which is not the giving of things, the exchange of commodities, but rather the giving of self, because we're made in the image of the Blessed Trinity. The giving of oneself to another in marital love or in friendship cannot be measured, cannot be quantified, and so the kind of love that governs personal relationships would seem to have very little to say to the kind of justice that governs the exchange of commodities, of things. Until, with this encyclical, in the middle of it, Pope Benedict XVI introduces the notion of gift. A gift is a commodity, it's a thing, but with a person attached. We know that if you return a gift or refuse a gift, you spurn a person. You reject the giver. And so at that point, with the concept of gift, we seem to bring together persons and things in a new kind of relationship, which opens the possibility to seeing how love is, in fact, a virtue that should also govern justice, can't be separated from it, as the Pope has said many times, and also should therefore govern the exchange of commodities. The problem, practically, of course, is how do you build an economy on the basis of gratuitousness, on the basis of gift, before the bottom line is computed. And the Pope doesn't tell us how to do it in the encyclical. Nonetheless, he gives a few hints, and he certainly leaves us with the challenge. I'm grateful for the gift of this program because it does try to fill in the blanks, to push the thesis, to try to explore what an encyclical of itself, of its own nature, cannot do. So the program is a great gift, not only to the university that sponsors it, and to the archdiocese where it takes place, and where the university lives as a Catholic institution, but to all the participants and to all those who will come to understand better what's involved in this challenge through the work that's going to be done here in the next few days. When you receive a gift, as you know, it is a gift because you don't have to be quid pro quo. You don't give something in return. Otherwise, it's not a gift. It's a bargain. When you receive a gift, you just say thanks. And so I say thanks to President Holtschneider, to Father Holtschneider, who has worked so hard to revivify DePaul in the Vincentian tradition and to make vital its Catholic heritage and its Catholic faith's influence on the life of the university today. I thank the university for being here and being the ever more effective urban Catholic university that makes it true to its traditions. I want to thank Professor Peter Casarella for being part of this university community and being part also of this local church. Also for the way in which, as has been mentioned, he has worked so hard to put together this marvelous program. At the end of these opening remarks, I'd like to say thanks in a particular way to two of my brothers in the episcopate who have come from some distance in order to be with us in Chicago in the next several days. Welcomed last night Cardinal Peter Turkson, whose home is Ghana, but whose place of labor and ministry now for the Universal Church is as the President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace in Rome itself, as part of the Roman Curia. Cardinal Turkson and I have met at several synods and on other occasions, and his participation in this convocation, in this program, is a great gift to all of us. More immediately, I want to welcome and to thank Archbishop Celestino Migliore for coming to Chicago and for taking a break then from his work, which has gone on for a number of years now and which is well respected and much appreciated, certainly by other bishops and by the whole church, and I hope by his conference at the United Nations, where he is the Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations organization. To them, thanks to all of you for being here. May God favor our discussions in these 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cardinal George, for those extremely kind and generous words. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker for tradition liberation. In organizing the conference, we sought to explore how Catholicism overcomes bifurcations not just between liberalism and conservatism, but between intellectual inquiry and social commitment, between the social gospel so prevalent in North America and the cry for liberation in the South, and between confronting the person of Jesus Christ and the call for a global assessment of economic structures. We wanted, as Cardinal George indicated, to encourage a dialogue and to fill in the blanks so people would have some more concrete notion of how this great gift of the encyclical could be implemented, could be reflected upon, and could serve as a stimulus in many venues. And in that respect, there could be no better person to begin this conference than our first plenary speaker, His Excellency Archbishop Celestino Migliore, permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. Now, nature sometimes intervenes in these proceedings. And much attention has been paid by us and probably by you to how volcanic ash from Iceland might intervene in our plans. But that wasn't the only force of nature. Archbishop Migliore's voice is also very weak this morning. So I'm going to give an introduction, and he's going to say a word, and then he's asked me to read his speech, so that's how we'll proceed. A native of Cuneo in the Piedmont region of Italy, Archbishop Migliore was born in 1952 and ordained a priest in 1977. Having obtained his master's degree in theology, Archbishop Migliore pursued his studies at the Pontifical Lateran University, where he was awarded the doctorate in canon law. In 1980, after graduating from the Pontifical Academy for Ecclesiastical Diplomacy, he joined the Holy See's diplomatic service. He has served at the Apostolic Nunciatures in Angola, Washington, D.C., Egypt, and Poland. In April 1992, he was appointed permanent observer of the Holy See to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, France, and from December 1995 to October 2002 served as Undersecretary for the Section of Relations with States of the Secretariat of State at the Vatican. While in Rome, he has taught ecclesiastical diplomacy at the Pontifical Lateran University there, and on October 30, 2002, he was nominated Apostolic Nuncio and Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York. Please welcome Archbishop Celestino Migliore.
Thank you, Peter, for those kind words. As you know, I cannot martyrize you this morning with my dentist accent and this hoarse voice. Anyway, I do wish to thank the President Holtschneider and Professor Casanova for organizing this important event. I'd like to greet also two good friends, Cardinal George and Cardinal Turkson, and many friends that this morning I could recognize here in this room. So I thank Peter for reading out my text, and afterward I would like to take some questions and answers, which will be very brief, of course. Thank you.
I suppose many of you are somewhat familiar with the jargon of the Catholic Church. However, it may not be superfluous to spend a few words on what an encyclical is and why this blunt title, Caritas and veritate. An encyclical, or circular letter, is an extended message from the Pope, addressed to all the bishops of the world, and sometimes to all people of goodwill. Why this almost cryptic title, Caritas and veritate? The title of the encyclical is usually taken from its first few words, its incipit. And usually, those very first words contain or summarize the topic of the document. Charity and truth is, quote, the principal driving force behind the authentic development of every person and all humanity, end of quote. This morning, before trying to answer questions like why a new encyclical and what is a new encyclical all about, I would like to deal with another basic question which arises quite often in our minds. Why the Pope, who is above all a religious and spiritual figure, why does he venture into the minefield of economics, finance, trade, and technology? With this document, Pope Benedict writes to us not as a politician or an expert in finance and economy, but as a man of faith trying to read the signs of the times in light of God's wisdom. Not to give out recipes and solutions, but to shed light on different human situations and help people make sense of and find hope, and to find the necessary resilience to confront new situations and events. The fact that we share the same faith in Jesus Christ does not entitle us to speak of a, quote, Catholic economy, unquote, or, quote, Catholic finance system, unquote. The term Catholic is not an appropriate label to attach to any sector of human activity. We may speak of a Catholic perspective, Catholic point of view, or Catholic tradition. In our current language, we do speak of a Catholic or Christian school, university, hospital, but we know that they stand for schools, universities, or hospitals run by people who treasure their Christian values and try to implement them in teaching, in education, or in caring. It is precisely against this background that Pope Benedict, in the context of a stringent and critical analysis of the contemporary society, which has produced the worst economic crisis of recent times, introduces the categories of charity and truth, capable together of interpreting and reviving development, economics, labor, and the environment. Christianity, or Catholicism, represents a faith in God who is triune, that is, whose specificity is the bond of love, who links God the Father with Jesus the Son and the Holy Spirit. Jesus came on earth and lived among us to show us and allow us to share in the same culture of love that exists in the Trinity. But he never intended to set up either a political system or a social system. He came to share his culture of love with as many women and men as possible, so that they could change their hearts and minds, conform them to the values and ideals that he preached and lived, to be the salt and light of the world. In turn, they will be able to take the initiative, discerning and promoting in all human institutions what is good, and critiquing and changing what is destructive and harmful. It helps to look back at history in order to understand the impact that Christian values have had on human history. Jesus Christ was born, and Christianity emerged in the context of the Roman Empire. But around the year 500 AD, this empire collapsed and left behind chaos and a political and social vacuum. For centuries, we had warlords who fought among themselves throughout Europe and the Near East. During that time, the Christian community tried to do one thing, to implement the commandment left by Jesus: love one another as I have loved you. This simple principle was translated into what we call the 7 corporal works of mercy: feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, visit those in prison, bury the dead. So, soon after the collapse of the Roman Empire and its administration, and well before the creation of the modern state administration, the 7 corporal works of mercy inspired Christian communities to organize the very first hospitals, schools, universities, centers of agricultural education and formation, humanitarian and social institutions for orphans, destitute people, girls, and women often neglected by society. This specific commitment to and involvement in the works of mercy has provided the Church through the centuries with a unique perspective in dealing with social issues and also with a wealth of social thought and doctrine. The Church shapes her social thought by carefully reflecting on the realities of human existence in society and in the international order, in the light of faith and the Church's tradition. Its main aim is to interpret these realities, determining their conformity with or divergence from the lines of the gospel teaching on man, and his vocation. Its aim is thus to guide Christian behavior. Solicitudo Rei Socialis 10. It is precisely in this light that Pope Benedict XVI issued his recent encyclical, Caritas and Veritate, Charity and Truth. It is inserted in the tradition of the social encyclicals that we usually initiate with Rerum Novarum, 1891 of Leo XIII, and continues with, among others, Quadragesimo Anno, 1931, Pacem in Terris, 1963, Octogesima Adveniens, 1971, the conciliar document Gaudium et Spes, 1965, and the encyclicals Solicitudo Rei Socialis, 1987, and Centesimus Annus from 1991. Why a new encyclical? As we know, the social doctrine of the Church has one dimension that perdures and one that changes with the times. This is the encounter of the gospel, which endures with the ever-new problems that humanity must confront. They change, and today do so at astonishing speed. If we look backwards in time and travel over again these last 20 years that separate us from Centesimus Annus, we notice what great changes have entered into human society. First, take into account the clash of ideologies that dominated the political landscape prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. After 1989, they occupied less and less attention. In their place, we have seen greater and greater confidence in technology. The hopes attached to technology developed into an ideology that challenges notions of what it means to be a human being. It caught public attention with the specter of human cloning, and it continues with nanotechnology. Already, in 1967, Pope Paul VI warned against entrusting the entire process of development to technology alone, because in that way it would lack direction. As technical capabilities advance, those who raise philosophical and theological questions are told not to stand in the way of progress, since relativism does not admit of such concerns. Caritas and veritate takes up this theme in chapter 6 on development of peoples and technology. Second, consider the change affected by globalization. Every aspect of social life has been affected by it. Just try to imagine what would be different without the internet. As such, the encyclical treats of it not just as a single subject, but as a theme throughout the entire discussion. One of the main thrusts of the encyclical rests on a concise but pregnant statement this is from section 19. I quote, "As society becomes ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers," end of quote. Religion accounts for a third dimension. A century and a half ago, Karl Marx said that religion was the opium of the peoples, in the sense that it can easily be used to control the population, to divert their attention from the need to start a social revolution by simply promising a paradise in the next world. Today, on the contrary, religion is said to be the vitamin of the poor. It gives the poor a precise identity, a sense of belonging to those who otherwise can be left behind on the road to globalization. The divisive influence of religion has long been recognized. Its more helpful aspects have not. While modern morality, particularly as expressed through the doctrines of human rights and humanitarian intervention, is marked by the tendency to reject and dismiss religion from public discourse as an opium and illusory happiness for the peoples, intercultural and interreligious dialogue are much talked about and pursued as indispensable tools and vitamins for the promotion of a culture of peace. The encyclical of Pope Benedict explores a somewhat unusual aspect of religious liberty, that is, the inseparable and directly proportional relationship between respect for religious liberty and development. A fourth development of the last 20 years concerns the rise of several states from poverty. With new opportunities come new challenges, especially to the balance of power between countries and the role of international organizations. Energy and other aspects of development occasion corporations sometimes exercising influence previously enjoyed only by governments. Today we often speak of a stagnation or even of a decline of multilateralism. Perhaps things are not so serious. The real problem is that multilateralism is in a period of transition. Until now, the word connoted interaction between governments, which were the bodies to indicate priorities, conduct negotiations, reach consensus or majority, make decisions, and implement them in collaboration with non-governmental organizations. Today, with the emergence of many other actors in national and international public life, multilateralism can no longer ignore these new players at any stage, debate, decision, or implementation. In the United Nations and its environment, we speak of, quote, messy multilateralism, unquote. Pope Benedict maintains that, quote, globalization certainly requires authority. This authority, however, must be organized in a subsidiary and stratified way if it is not to infringe upon freedom and if it is to yield effective results in practice. A principle which operates on a national level as well as on a global and international one. The UN Security Council, one of the most authoritative forums in the context of international organizations, was composed 65 years ago of 5 countries, 4 of which were victors in the World War. Today we have other countries that are considered equally victorious. They're called emerging powers, not because they won a devastating war, but because they have placed themselves firmly on the path that leads them back from poverty and underdevelopment. As such, they expect to have their say. These significant new trends, among others, happened in the 20 years that separate us from the last social encyclical and have changed profoundly the social dynamics of the world, sufficient on their own to prompt the writing of a new social encyclical. I would now like to illustrate specific points raised by Pope Benedict's encyclical. The first is the idea that the world is in trouble because of the lack of thinking. A new trajectory of thinking is needed in order to arrive at a better understanding of the implications of our being one family. Interaction among the peoples of the world calls us to embark upon this new trajectory so that integration could signify solidarity rather than marginalization. That the world is in trouble because of the lack of thinking is a remark taken from Paul VI in his 43-year-old encyclical Populorum Progressio. Actually, Caritas and Veritate was initially conceived as a commemoration of the 40 years of Populorum Progressio. But then, the editing of Caritas and Veritate demanded more time, also in view of the ongoing economic and financial crisis. However, there is an evident connection and continuity between the two pontifical documents, inasmuch as the latter focused on the development of peoples and the latter on the integral development of human person in society. On the former, on the integral development of human person in society. Pope Benedict points out that a new trajectory of thinking is needed today to diffuse the seeds of crisis embedded in our current economic and social systems. In other words, to overcome our current financial and economic crises, we need intellectual clarity and creativity. In these last months, following the publication of the encyclical, he returned to this point with clear emphasis. While the financial system seems to be regaining stability and increasing production in some sectors, while this financial system seems to be regaining stability and increasing production in some sectors, it also offers signs of economic recovery. In this context, in order to promote economic and social growth along with employment, it seems that the patterns of consumption should be focused upon relational goods and services which promote greater connection between people. By investing in relational goods such as medical care, education, culture, art, sport, all things which develop a person and require unique human interaction rather than machine production, the state, through its public intervention, would be addressing development at its root, while also promoting employment and long-term development. The second is the idea that there will not be true humanism, and therefore a human economy, we can add, if it is not open to the absolute. The various world crises that intertwined in the last months bring to the discussion presuppositions of thought and principles of individual, social, and international behavior, which extend well beyond the financial or economic field. The idea of producing resources and assets, that is, the economy, and strategically managing them, that is, politics, without also wanting the same actions to carry out the good, that is, ethics, has been proven to be a naive or cynical and fatal delusion. In this light, the two fundamental rights to life and religious liberty find in Caritas and Veritate a new approach. That is, without neglecting the moral aspect of these two rights, Pope Benedict links them directly and irreversibly to a correct policy of development. And I quote now from sections 28 and 29 of the encyclical. Openness to life is at the center of true development. When a society moves towards the denial or suppression of life, it ends up no longer finding the necessary motivation and energy to strive for man's true good. If personal and social sensitivity towards the acceptance of a new life is lost, then other forms of acceptance that are valued for society also wither away. And when the state promotes, teaches, or actually imposes forms of practical atheism, it deprives its citizens of the moral and spiritual strength that is indispensable for attaining integral human development, and in it impedes them from moving forward with renewed dynamism as they strive to offer a more generous human response to divine love. End of quote. This reminds me of another similar moment in recent history. At the very beginning of communism in the Soviet Union, the church expressed its opposition on the ground that it was atheistic, that it excluded and opposed God. But this argument did not seem to be able to rally the masses. When the church started criticizing communists for being against God because it trampled the basic private, social, and political rights of the image of life of the God on earth, the human being, then its points were well understood. The third is that in order to defeat underdevelopment, action is required not only in improving exchange-based transactions and implanting public welfare structures, but above all, on gradually increasing openness to forms of economic activity marked by quotas of gratuitousness and communion. Caritas and veritate 39. In other words, we need to infuse solidarity and fraternity into economics. Paragraph 19 of the encyclical sheds some light on this point. The Pope writes, "The causes of underdevelopment are not primarily of the material order. We need to search for them in other dimensions of the human person. First of all, in the will, which often neglects the duties of solidarity. Secondly, in thinking, which does not always give proper direction to the will. Underdevelopment has an even more important cause. It is the lack of brotherhood among individuals and peoples. As society becomes ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers. Reason, by itself, is capable of grasping the equality between men and of giving stability to their civic coexistence, but it cannot establish fraternity. This originates in a transcendent vocation from God the Father, who loved us first, teaching us through the Son what fraternal charity is." The media demonstrated itself to be interested above all in how the Pope could assess the current capitalist system. Newspapers wondered whether the new encyclical would condemn capitalism as such. Well, after an attentive reading of the encyclical, we see that it does not condemn capitalism as such. Rather, it clarifies that confusion of thought which identifies the market economy with capitalist market economy. Indeed, there are the capitalist markets, those tied to the logic of profit, and there are those we can call the civil markets, that is, economic systems which tend to include the social responsibility of businesses, cooperatives, associations of responsible consumers, the non-profit world, along with the redistributive activity of the state. The current crisis concerns a particular version of market economies, the capitalist version, but not the market economy as such. In other words, the social doctrine of the Church has never spoken against the market economy. Rather, it has spoken beyond it, in favor of the civil markets more than the capitalist market. What we realize now very clearly is that after the crisis of the Soviet model, the capitalist economic market has not kept its promises and is not able to deliver to resolve a number of problems. What we are called to do now is to civilize the market, that is, to make it so that once again inside the economic systems blow the winds of gratuity, of solidarity, and subsidiarity, and of reciprocity. But this change has to emerge from within the economic systems and not as an aside. That is to say, from Monday through Friday I follow the logic of profit, and at the end of the week, in a metaphorical sense, I engage in philanthropy. This model today is in an irreversible crisis. From the encyclical emerges a positive vision, which offers encouragement to humanity because it seeks to find the resources of truth, and it seeks to find that which will help it to overcome these difficulties. This is not a sentimental encouragement, given that in Caritas and veritate all the principal problems of development in the various areas of the planet are enumerated with clarity and concern. This is rather a well-grounded encouragement aware that in the world there are at work many protagonists and agents of truth and love. But in the title, Caritas and veritate, there appear two fundamental terms in the magisterium of Benedict XVI, precisely charity and truth. These two terms have marked his entire magisterium in these years of his pontificate, in that they represent the very essence of Christian revelation. In connection with each other, these constitute the fundamental motive in the historical and public dimension of Christianity. They are at the origin, therefore, of the social doctrine of the Church. Thank you very much.
You willing to take a few questions?
I'm Nick Lund-Maltese. I work in the Peace and Justice Office of the Archdiocese. And Cardinal, thank you for your paper, even if your voice didn't allow you to deliver it. I was curious, so I'll try to ask as a yes or no question to save your voice. Has the reception of the encyclical in the United States been less welcoming towards those portions which are positive regarding international institutions than the reception of those passages in other nations? In other words, in the United States, there's a certain sense of exceptionalism, of centrality, of being the superpower, and there was quite a bit of pushback against international support for international institutions as seen in the encyclical or governance. Is that an American phenomenon solely or mostly, or was that also in other parts of the Catholic world?
I think that the main reaction in the States was to this idea of infusing gratuitousness, solidarity, communion in economy. Many said, what is this? This is not scientific economy. We had a month ago side event at the United Nations to present this encyclical. And I said, well, it's useless to embark in long talks about that. We risk of repeating theological or spiritual considerations. Let's go to experiments. And today, all over the world, there are experiments that involve not dozens, but thousands of people in this new way of rethinking economy. An economy that is not only for profit, but is an economy that includes these values. And so an economy that does not lead us to reject capitalism in itself. Yes, it's an economy that leads us to be very careful and reject the only logic of profit, but to retain the law of the market, because this is something that is essential. And but also, I think that your question touched on another point on the do we need a great world institution to regulate all this? If we take the United Nations, well, we have the Bretton Woods institutions, FMI, World Bank, and others that regulate the financial world. And then the United Nations has the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, which is the poor cousin of the Security Council. Because the Security Council is the veto, is a power. The resolution of the Security Council are binding. The Economic Council has no political, no binding power. Why? Because this is the will of those who compose the United Nations. That the regulation of economy cannot be under a strict authority. Nevertheless, there are many corrections that we try to add to this system. One thing is, for example, think of the international debt. There is also the issue of all the issue of the international debt is in the hands of the Paris Club. But the Paris Club are those who give money and those who make the rules to get that money back. This is not fair. So at least for some issues we need really to reinforce an international power. We need kind of a Security Council also for economic and financial power. For example, we had recently the so-called odious debt contracted by, let's say, by Saddam Hussein for years and years. And he used that money also in order to oppress his people. And now that he's gone, his people has to pay back that debt. So he's considering these particular issues that also create some new sensitivity, even in these circles, international circles that are really cautious and hesitant to speak of an international authority in economic and financial matters.
Archbishop Migliore said, it's a gift from God, a free gift to us who are also gifts to one another, and it's to be used in such a way that the gift can be passed on to future generations, which puts limits on the way in which we use it. So anything that would open the globe to simple exploitation, which has been the case in the last 300 years, one could make the case by looking at the shift in scientific methodology with Francis Bacon from observation to experiment, where we torture nature in order to force her to give up her secrets for our use. That has created now a situation where the sense of the environment as gift is gone, and we use it either to produce wealth or else to enjoy. But in Catholicism, nature is a source of law and not just wealth. It's even a source of moral law because it reveals something about the Creator. That's a respectful attitude towards creation that puts God at the center of it and not ourselves for our own purposes, whether to create wealth or to manipulate for our own enjoyment.
I'm Roberto Goizueta from Boston College. One of the things that strikes me often in reading the pages of, say, the Wall Street Journal or other financial media is the language that is often used to discuss the laws and the logic of the market. The market is universal. It is all-knowing and all-powerful. We have to subordinate ourselves to the market, and essentially that human agency is irrelevant, that these laws and this logic function independent of human agency. All of which suggests to me theology, theological language. So what I'd like to ask is whether, in fact, what Pope Benedict and before him John Paul were suggesting was even more than that ethics has to be introduced as an internal element of the markets and of capitalism, but that what we're dealing with here are really two alternative theologies, suggested by the term, for example, practical materialism. And that what the way to address the situation is not simply to suggest that we have to introduce these wishy-washy human elements into scientific economic considerations, but that in fact those economic considerations aren't nearly as scientific as people assume they are, and that are just as wishy-washy in their own way as theology is presumed to be. So, and it's a lesson that it seems to me we haven't learned even in the wake of the financial crisis, that there are still those who want to insist that the laws of the market function independent of human agency, and therefore function as a kind of absolute which cannot be questioned.
Well, I think that this is a very important reflection, because I also mentioned at the beginning of this, in order to explain a little bit why the Catholic Church has what some call the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, others call the social thought, others call the social teaching of the Catholic Church. I'm not going to solve this problem because I have here the Cardinal President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and it's up to him to to clarify these issues. But call it doctrine, call it thought, call it teaching. Before being doctrine, thought or teaching is an experience. And this is what is important. It's an experience that Christians experience the love of God, receiving and giving back. And they started with the 7 corporal works of mercy, something that today I think that our kids don't study anymore that in the catechism. But in my times, some 50 years ago, we did study the 7 corporal, and this is exactly, this is the if you want, the basics of the economics. In the year 2000, when the world realized that the fight against poverty and development was lagging behind, they came out at the United Nations with the so-called 8 Millennium Goals. If you go through those 8 Millennium Goals, the first 7 are the 7 corporal works of mercy. The 8th is cooperation, and it's quite controversial because, for example, the country that hosts us, the states, say, well, I don't want to have targets, indicators. I want to establish bilateral relations with countries and help them bilaterally. the countries, developing countries say, no, give us money, the ODA, the official development aid, and we will do it. There are many interpretations, but the first 7 are the 7. So when people ask me, what is the stance of the Holy See toward the Millennium Goals, I said, we started being enthusiastically supporters. But in all honesty, I have to say that now we have to also say, and I say it almost every other day at the UN, our great disappointment. Because the Millennium Goals are conceived to lead to sustainable development. And unfortunately, some selectivity sneaked into this process. And just like when you speak of rights, there is always some rights that are more important than the others. Some rights that can be eclipsed, and others are the great mantra. The same thing in the goals. And we lose sight of the real goal, which is the sustainable development. But this is a long discourse, but to go back, I think that our theology, and here we have a great theologian, he can correct me, started based upon experience, not a reflection, but experience, that we recognized the love of God and we responded to the love of God. And also, our efforts in economy are not probably that scientific, but are this. We try to incarnate this love of God, and we give, I think, humbly our experience to the world.
Could I make a comment? You can tell me if I'm reading something into the document, but if you're worried about being wishy-washy, you have to clarify what is the reality check, and what is the reality check for economic activity. When we talk of markets, it seems there's a distinction in papal social teaching and also in this encyclical between a business market and a financial market. And the church is more at ease with markets that are closer to people, where it's clear the economic activity is at the service of people, that it can therefore be an act that is loving. So when you're producing things for people to use, in a manufacturing economy and the rest, the market is more easily tracked morally as well as financially. Are you making things that you can sell at a profit so you can make more things? The farther you get from a business market into financial services, the more, in a sense, morally ambiguous the activity becomes, and the church becomes more suspicious. The whole history of usury is a case in point. When money was not a commodity itself, just was a substitute for economies, well, it wasn't something that you could use to make a profit. In a changed economy, when money itself becomes an economy, you can rent money, and therefore interest is morally all right because it is now a commodity that can be traded itself and not just stand in for things that are traded. When you keep moving from interest into financial derivatives, finally, where you use money just to make money, and nothing is really created except values based upon credit, are you into a kind of a high-class gambling that abandons people, that creates these instruments for their own sake until finally they crash and people are severely hurt? So it seems to me when you talk about market, certainly the business market is one thing, and the financial services market is something else that perhaps calls forth a little different kind of moral analysis.
Hi, yeah, Randall Smith, University of St. Thomas in Houston. I take it that one of the sources of opposition to the creation of something like an international economic power or authority is the fear that it will result in the creation of centralized bureaucracies not answerable to local needs and local people. In other words, that there'll be no real subsidiarity. I'm just back from Europe in a conference where some scholars were, thinking about this in terms of the EU. They love the cooperation, but they're seeing their authority, their sovereignty slip away to these centralized bureaucracies. How do we see, if you could comment on this, the creation of some kind of international authority which isn't toothless, but then somehow does respect this fundamental principle of subsidiarity?
I think that this is something that we don't have to create from the scratch, because it already exists. I mean, we have many regional organizations that deal with that, and it's the interaction of these regional and international world organizations that is going to create this new system that we need. I mean, you are perfectly right that there is a kind of a opposition or to establish an international authority. And this is not only in the economy, in many other aspects. If you take migrations, now there are organizations, there are even a couple of countries that insist in having an international authority on migrations. But those things you can have kind of a clear collection of international law that regulates those issues, but not a strict international authority that becomes bureaucracy, becomes also in a way disrespectful of the local sensitivities and autonomies. So what the accent is put on creating at a level of international law compilation of very accurate compilation of law that can help and can shed light on all these problems of finance, economy, and migration and other issues, but leaving let's say the daily running of these issues to organizations which are closer to the people. So, and this is the concept of solidarity. And that's why, for example, in 50 years of existence of the ECOSOC at the UN, it was never given a political binding authority as the Security Council has.
Archbishop Migliore to rest his much labored voice. Just by way of announcement, I hope all the participants have copies
And then from 11 to 12:30, there'll be the first set of concurrent sessions that are all listed in the program. We have a very able staff outside in the lobby can help direct you to those rooms. The speakers are invited to a luncheon. That'll take place in room 220 on the second floor of this building, and then we'll go again to the concurrent sessions in the afternoon. So let me just thank for their presence Father Holtschneider and Dean Suchar for the words of welcome. Thank Cardinal Turkson for being with us this morning. We're very grateful for that, Your Eminence. But most of all, I want to thank Cardinal George for these remarks to get us thinking about the encyclical in a very profound way, and Archbishop Migliore not only for preparing a very comprehensive overview of these blanks that need to be filled in, but exercising your voice against the force of nature, and for that we're extraordinarily grateful.